a man that really doesn't need any introduction will share about those developments. And Rick is still conferred. Rick, it's your time.
Do I click here?
You have your...
Yay. It's a delight to be here. You can see that I was kind of talking about balancing public benefit with returns to shareholders, assuming that the FDA Advisory Committee meeting would go well, and we'd have to start thinking about commercialization and the trade-offs. That's obviously not what happened. I just want to say I don't have any big disclosures here. I am paid by MAPS. But I'm president of MAPS, got my PhD at Kennedy School. We started MAPS in '86. The MAPS Public Benefit Corp, now Lycos, started in 2014. And this says I'm speaking as president of MAPS, not as a board member or representative of Lycos. But I'm not even speaking as a president of MAPS. I'm speaking here today just as my own individual personal views about what just happened and how we go forward into the future. There we go. Wait. This just to say, MAPS was, over the years, we raised about $150 million in donations, and we had an enormous amount of support by people working under market or donating their time. And we've also have as our mission, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here, is really to think about the globalization of access for humanitarian purposes, as well as overall drug legalization and drug policy reform. So that's kind of the focus of the nonprofit. The focus of the for-profit Public Benefit Corp is now, I'd say one of the biggest disappointments of my career has been that I was a failure at raising all the money that we needed from donations. And we were kind of the victim of our own success. What happened was that as we ramped up into phase 3, as we started demonstrating that there were ways to go through the FDA, the for-profit psychedelic companies started, and then a lot of the donors were like, why should I donate? Look at all these people that are investing. So we just completed a $100 million round for Lycos from investors, and that means that there are now both public benefit objectives and return to shareholders. MAPS is the largest single shareholder, but we don't own more than 50% of it. We're a minority, and we do appoint the majority of the board members. This is Alex Gray, the interpretation of our logo, and what this emphasizes is really that the therapy is the primary thing. It's people helping people. It's the psychedelic swirls in the background. Really, this is to be thinking about therapy. I'm uncomfortable with MDMA-AT because that really puts the emphasis on the MDMA, and it kind of makes the assisted therapy part kind of disappear for a lot of people. So I think we really need to keep thinking that this is actually therapy that the MDMA helps. It's not MDMA that the therapy is beside the point or just a minor thing. It's really the therapeutic context is the most important thing. So what happened at the advisory board, and I want to share my optimism, very much so, that I think that in 2 months, by August 11th, when the FDA will make its final determination, I think there's a greater than 50-50 chance, substantially greater, that FDA will approve at that time. And the reasons why I think this are that, first off, the advisory committee is not the FDA. So whatever happens at this advisory committee, the FDA is actually trying to propose changes in the whole advisory committee system, where they want the advice, but the idea that these committee members vote and make sort of more formal recommendations gives more credence in a way to the decision making of this advisory committee meeting. So the FDA is considering trying to eliminate the voting at these committees, to just have them give advice. The advisory committee meeting tend to be people that are more academic than people that are involved in the pharma industry. And in pharma industry, there's a lot of trade-offs. In the academic field, the idea that double-blind studies are the way to go, that's kind of what academics are thinking. So I anticipated that there might be more concerns at the advisory committee meeting level about this concept of functional unblinding. But that was something that I wrote a big chapter on my dissertation in 2001. we ended up testing my theory of how to do a double-blind study. The theory was that the best way to do a double-blind study with psychedelics would be therapy plus low dose versus therapy plus full dose. Everybody has the same expectancy, everybody's getting MDMA, and the challenge would be to find the dose of MDMA that's not a microdose, because then you wouldn't know what it was, but the dose that's high enough to start causing confusion between the full dose, but not so high that you start getting therapeutic benefits, and that would make it really difficult. So in our 16 years of phase 2 studies, from 2000 to 2016, we tested therapy without MDMA, therapy with 25 milligrams, 30 milligrams, 40 milligrams, 50 milligrams, 75, 100, 125, and 150. And we would also give half the initial dose after 2 hours as a supplemental to extend the period of time. So what we discovered is that I was half right and half wrong in my dissertation. Luckily, we discovered it after I got my PhD. But the part that I was half right about is that there are ways, as you up the dose of MDMA, that people can't tell the difference between that and the full dose. And actually, in our second phase 3 study, we had 25% of the people that got therapy with inactive placebo either couldn't tell or thought they really had MDMA, or weren't sure but thought it could be MDMA. So that when you're in a deep therapeutic setting and you've got the music, the eye shades, 8 hours, people really get into their processes, and it is for a quarter of them, they're not quite sure if they really got MDMA or not. But what we discovered in these phase 2 studies is that these low doses actually made people uncomfortable. You know, it's like turbulence from an airplane is the best way to say it. Is once you get above the clouds, then you're going fast. So we showed that the low doses that gave us the opportunity for the double blind also compromised the therapy. So the people that had therapy with low-dose MDMA didn't do as well. They still did better, but they didn't do as well as the people that had therapy with no MDMA at all, with inactive placebo. So that if we would have used low-dose MDMA as the blinding tool, it would have been easier for us to show a difference between MDMA with full dose than if we had chosen MDMA with inactive placebo. And the real question that the FDA wanted to answer, that we should answer, is if you can do this with therapy without a drug, why bother add the drug? So that if you're comparing therapy with low dose that's compromising the depth of the effectiveness of the MDMA, it's not a good solution. So we proposed this idea to the FDA. We'll give you blinding if you want it, but we think you should make it harder on us to show a difference between the two groups. Plus, if you have no MDMA at all, inactive placebo, your safety profile is better. You understand it because you can't say, oh, maybe that was because this low-dose MDMA triggered them in some ways. Whatever happens is because of the therapy and because of the condition that people come in. So we went through this long negotiation with FDA, 8 months, and the FDA selected therapy with inactive placebo versus therapy with low dose. And there are problems with the blinding, clearly, but that is the best practical approach, and the FDA signed on to that after this 8-month special protocol assessment. So we think that the advisory committee meeting, their perspective on this functional unblinding was different than how the FDA sees it. The second part that the concern was at the advisory committee meeting was about the therapy. They said this therapy is so undefined, it could be anything. There's no standardization, which is not the case. So we have done our very best to a treatment manual, we have adherence raters, we have adherence criteria, we have all these people trained to watch videotapes to make sure that the method is being followed. So we need to do a better job of, and I think the FDA understands all of the different ways that we have done this kind of standardization of the therapy. But that was a concern of the advisory committee meeting. Then the third part was these various allegations of misconduct. And what I can say from that is that MAPS has proceeded, Lycos has proceeded with the highest standards of integrity that we can. We want to be experts on both risks and benefits, and that we are making a call for anybody who is in the phase 3 studies that hasn't participated yet in the phase 3 studies to do so, in the follow-up studies, I mean. And then also that the FDA is doing a big investigation on this, and we look forward to their results, which will come out in a week or so. Then the fourth issue that I think swayed a lot of the people at the advisory committee was the issue of safety. How do you protect safety from therapist abuse, which can happen? And so I think there is a lot of procedures that have been put in place. I think that the concerns are that there was a situation in 2017 that should never have happened, but as far as we know, didn't happen before, hasn't happened since, and so we think that the safety can be done. And one of the ways that we're looking forward, that I'm looking forward to this, is a study of the role of touch in psychotherapy. There's some researchers that are interested in doing that, and I think we need third-party places where people can call to complain that are independent of the company. But I think that all these can be addressed, and so I'm actually very hopeful that in the next several months there'll be a lot of education going on, a lot of dialogues that Lykos will have with FDA, and so I think that, as I said, there's a really good chance in my mind that it will still be approved. Again, we're following the Dutch, who are ahead. The Dutch Advisory Committee was really good. So, as I said, here we go. So let's assume it is approved. There's just, when I started MAPS in '86, I assumed that it would immediately become a generic because MDMA is in the public domain. I learned about MDMA in '82, but it was used for PTSD before I even knew about MDMA. That's in the public domain. I wrote my dissertation in 2001. I had the mistaken assumption I knew everything about the topic, and I still thought it would immediately become a generic. But in 2014, I learned that I had missed an important thing, which is called data exclusivity, which means that in 1984, actually, Reagan signed into a bill, the Hatch-Waxman Act, that created incentives for developing drugs that are off patent. And so you have exclusive use of your data for 5 years in the US, it's 10 years in Europe. And if you do pediatric studies, and the FDA has said that if they do give permission for MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, it would be for 18 years or older, but then Lykos would be required to do studies in adolescents. And I think the closer that you can treat people to the trauma, the better it is, the more qualities there are. If you heard the cost effectiveness, the more meaningful the benefits are through the course of a lifespan. So I think that when I learned about this, you get an extra 6 months for data exclusivity working with adolescents. So that's a period of time where there could be a monopoly. And so I said, okay, now instead of constantly asking people for money, MAPS can tell a different story to donors, which is that if we can make MDMA into a medicine, we meaning MAPS Public Benefit Corp, 100% owned by MAPS, the nonprofit, then the source of income could be used entirely for public benefit, for doing more research, and that we wouldn't need to continually go back to the donor. So that's why I started the for-profit public benefit MAPS Pharmaceutical Company. Pharma companies hardly ever use it because they want patents, so which have a longer life. But there's all these public companies, there's all these private companies, and that's, as I said, made it difficult to raise the rest of the money from donations. And so we did complete this $100 million financing round. My guess is MAPS, Beckley, Council on Spiritual Practices, Hefter, the major nonprofits that have funded research, SAPT as well, that probably since '86 around $300 million, just a rough guess, has been raised. But since 2020, $4 billion has gone into for-profit psychedelic companies. So that just gives you a sense. There are advantages for being for-profit in terms of access to capital. And now I think there's so much research that's going on with psychedelics, it's really pretty incredible. So the greatest loss to public benefit from the perspective of MAPS, the nonprofit, would have been if we would have run out of money and not made MDMA into a medicine. So faced with this dilemma of how do we think about public benefit, it made sense for us to go ahead and go on and work with investors. I had hoped that that wouldn't be necessary, but it did. So there's a bunch of now different areas, issues that these trade-offs will now be between public benefit. This is for the entire industry. This is not for any particular companies, not just for MDMA, but there's always going to, there are multiple pharmaceutical companies, psychedelic companies that are public benefit companies. There are others that are not, but I think they should be to really balance public benefit with profit. But the concerns are, this is just the basic ones, and I'll talk about each one of them in a moment. Drug policy reform, is that good or bad for business? Open science versus patents. this, because it's delivered by therapists, how do we think about quality versus quantity and the training of the therapist, the price of the treatment, the size of the patient assistance program? It's different in America because so many people don't have insurance, unfortunately. And then how do you manage to get staff and management of a company oriented towards considering public benefit? And how do you link public benefit metrics to people's stock options and bonuses as the way to focus their attention? So this is the first one, drug policy reform. My personal view is that as people move more and more to realize drug war is a total failure, it's counterproductive. It was so great to hear about how things are perceived in the Netherlands here and elsewhere, that it'll be easier for people to get access to it. And will that be harmful for the business of providing it at higher costs with therapy? I think personally that it's going to be good for the business, that legalization will destigmatize, it will help more people, but then there'll be more of an interest in people going to the professionals who are trained, who are cross-trained in MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, all the different things that may come around. So, and then it will be covered hopefully by insurance. So I think it's going to be good for business. If indeed it's bad for business, then I say to hell with the business. Because really, because it's a fundamental human right for us to explore our consciousness. And when you think about what's the real goal, the goal here is to help humanity as a whole, thinking about that, to move through trauma, to move through parochialism, fundamentalism, learn how to live together, stop destroying the planet, stop trying to kill each other. And I think there's this idea of this global spirituality where we understand that we're all in it together. And I think that when you imagine how does that kind of mass consciousness shift happen, it will happen in part for people getting these experiences for therapy, for clinical indications. But it will be more likely to happen at a larger scale through drug policy reform. For people who don't necessarily have a diagnosis, we could also think about it as moving towards preventative medicine rather than treating people after they have the symptoms. So that's going to require a lot of public education, peer support, educate people about psychedelics, change the education people get in schools. But in the end, I do think that MAPS has always had this parallel track. One is drug policy reform, the other is drug development through the FDA. I think they reinforce each other, and I don't think one hurts the other. But that's a question. So there was a bill in California. As you know, there's different state-level reforms that are happening for plant medicines. But people have this romantic idea. If it's a plant, oh, why should this plant be illegal? Plant, of course, took forever, Ethan and others, to help people think about that for marijuana. And lately we have been saying that MDMA really does also come from a plant. Just happens to be a manufacturing plant. But this was the first effort to add MDMA. This was by a legislative effort, not through an initiative, and this was actually pulled recently. But I will share that there were some investors in Lycos that were concerned that this might be bad for the business model. So I think there is this tension. I don't think it will be. The other way that people get access in terms of drug policy reform, particularly in America, are these psychedelic churches. So it's incredible the number of people that are going to psychedelic churches. There's one called the Church of Ambrosia in Oakland that has 100,000 members, and they provide psilocybin mushrooms to them. And there's basically no enforcement. So you could say the rise of the religious right and the kind of ways that they've been trying to protect religious freedom through the law is now benefiting the psychedelic community. This Congregation for Sacred Practices is one of those that has multiple different sacraments and is now talking about adding MDMA as one of their sacraments, which I'm fully supportive of. Then this open science versus patents. This is obviously that open science, this is what I had wanted to do. MAPS actually had an anti-patent strategy, but once we had to take in investors, now it's changed. And so there are openness to patents, but really this is generic pricing versus monopoly pricing. Where do you set the price is going to be a good, important issue. Therapist quality versus quantity. there's 13 million PTSD patients in America. We are just facing increase in trauma, increase in depression, increase in anxiety. So how will there ever be a way to reach all these people? The thought is that you need to train lots and lots of therapists. But then, what's the quality of the training? And one of the key issues, and I saw Torsten's presentation earlier today, which was tremendous about therapist self-experience. That, I think, is one of the main points of training therapists. But how will this go forward into the future? So this quality versus quantity is something to really watch out for. So MindMed, in one of the most bogus press releases ever that was designed specifically to boost their stock price, which was to say, oh, we just did LSD. We got without any therapy at all. Turns out there's doctors and therapists with people the entire time, but they were instructed, don't do therapy. But they provided support, and they actually did do therapy of different kinds. So this was just really, their stock went up 50% after this announcement came out, but it's totally bogus. Compass is trying to say you don't need therapists for psilocybin, you just need psychological support, again, trying to reduce the cost of the treatment. And there are advantages to that in terms of increasing access, the more you can reduce the cost. But MAPS incubated research, which is MDMA-assisted therapy, really whatever is we were talking about with MDMA for PTSD is very focused on the therapeutic part of it. Price of the treatment. Just want to say that when you hear price, there's different prices. One is going to be to the insurance company. The other is to be what people pay with their copays. So just keep in mind that it's challenging because, as I said, in America, the copays can be very minimal. What the insurance companies pay can be quite a lot, depending on the value of the treatment. But what do we do about all the people that don't have insurance? Well, you have patient assistance programs. You hear from this from pharma companies all the time. This is just a random example. Novo Nordisk, which is, by the way, a public benefit company, they committed to patients, and then it's free and no registration charge. That's great. For almost all the patient assistance programs that you hear from big pharma, say, hey, for those people that can't afford it, talk to us. We can give you the drug for free. But the problem is that in psychedelic-assisted therapy, if you give people the drug for free, if they can't afford the therapy, it doesn't do them any good. And they won't get the drug without the therapy. You only get the drug under direct supervision of the therapy. So you cannot get the drug. It's never a take-home drug. So how does this patient assistance program actually work? Because the cost of the drug, the marginal cost of producing a drug, you can kind of base it on even underground costs for illegal things. It's not that much. And when you're doing it in a legal way, a mass scale, the costs are trivial for the drug. But for the therapy, it's much, much more than the cost. So this will be a kind of this public benefit versus return to shareholders is how large is this patient assistance program going to be? Hard to say. And then this is the big challenge. How do we develop public benefit metrics that are quantifiable and that then are linked to performance? And the other part is that what's going on with international humanitarian? We heard talks about bringing MDMA to Ukraine. MAPS is trying to do all sorts of humanitarian projects on the world. Basically, the idea is that MAPS, the nonprofit, wants to go where the suffering is, but where there isn't money, and we will try to use donations to do that. So this is now an issue that it's expenses, it's not income, so it's moved from the public benefit for-profit to the nonprofit. And we want to prioritize going where the greatest burden of trauma is and the fewest resources for treatment, whereas a for-profit company will go to where the burden of trauma is, but where it can be paid for. And so one of our potential donors at a meeting said that we are on the knife's edge between altruism and capitalism. And this, I think, is going to be the challenge for the whole field. And so I would just encourage all of us to really be aware that there are these tensions. And we're the right places. There's no one right answer. It's sort of a mix of all the other different dimensions. But what I'm hoping is that over time there will be this recognition that the dire straits that humanity is in, the enormous amounts of trauma, of depression, of anxiety, substance abuse, requires more of a focus on public benefit than maximizing profits. And as a final thing, I just want to reiterate that I do really feel very optimistic about what will happen in the US. And basically, it's been 38 years. So if I'm over-optimistic and on October 11th, FDA doesn't say yes, they will say yes to something. It's not that they will say no. They may say no to yes, no, we're not ready for prescription use right away, but they will say yes to here's what else you have to do. So it's been 38 years, if it's 39 years, if it's 40 years, if it's 45 years, if it's 50 years, it matters for all the people that are suffering now. When you think about how many people have committed suicide since 1985, when MDMA was criminalized, when we know that many people could be helped by MDMA-assisted therapy, it's tragic. So every extra day is a tragedy, but at the same time, however long it takes, we'll just keep working at it. And hopefully when I come back here in a couple of years, I'll have better news. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rick.
Yeah.
I'm always impressed by your optimism. Actually, it's really inspiring.
Well, basically, these drugs work. So eventually, the world will figure it out.
So we have 4 minutes for questions. So please line up to the mic at the left or the right if you have a question. But please be very brief because we have a room change in between. So we really cannot extend the session.
Hi. Thank you for your openness and courage and optimism. I was wondering why there are no drug-to-drug trials to overcome the double-blind. For instance,
so that's a good
psilocybin versus MDMA.
Well, when you have two things that you think, for the registration studies that you need to persuade, so that you need a drug with a control. So if both of these things are supposedly effective to some degree, that's not the way to do these studies. You need some sort of control group that doesn't also have this therapeutic. So that's why when you talk about our research, actually, it's not a placebo. It's not placebo-controlled. The control group is therapy. And when you look at the outcomes from the people that were in the phase 3 studies, the first study, 32% of the people that got therapy without MDMA no longer had PTSD. In the second study, it was about 46% no longer had PTSD in the control group. So if we were to compare MDMA, let's say, to an SSRI, obviously that's not going to be blinded. If you compare MDMA to a tranquilizer, the therapist will tell the difference, people will tell the difference. So the best way would have been everybody gets MDMA. So I think that's the kind of thing. Now, there will be some studies that will look at MDMA-assisted therapy versus cognitive processing therapy. So once we've demonstrated something is effective, then we can start comparing it to get these cost-effectiveness studies. But that's why.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rick. Actually, the cognitive processing study, I think we have it published by Anne Wagner tomorrow morning. So for the people that are interested, please join tomorrow morning, I think, in this room.
Yes.
I'm afraid we're really on time. We cannot really continue, but I'm sure that you're still open to answer questions outside of this session. So thank you very much again. Give a big applause to Rick. And,
Great. Thank you.
Sorry.